Liam Sterling stepped into the Northern Star Bank at 11:40 a.m., wearing a worn brown jacket with stains that weren't accidental, a 3-day beard he had cultivated specifically for the moment, and hair he'd left uncombed, though he normally kept it immaculate. He didn't enter as he normally would. He didn't enter with the stride of a man who knew he had a 7-figure account and that the managers greeted him by name. He entered slowly, looking around with the specific caution of someone unsure if they had the right to be in a space that clearly cost more to maintain than what that person probably earned in a month. The lobby was exactly as he remembered it from visits with his father 20 years ago. Polished granite from Quebec that reflected light so that each step echoed with controlled sound. Crystal chandeliers that projected warm light, all without being ostentatious. Subtle velvet ropes that separated the VIP area from the general area, with the subtlety of someone who didn't need to shout exclusivity to communicate it, and muffled silence. It was a place where money moved in quantities that didn't need to be mentioned aloud. It smelled of fresh paper and the discreet perfume of ladies waiting in leather armchairs. It sounded of keyboards being pressed by manicured fingers and hushed conversations about investments, returns, and diversified portfolios. It was, in every sense, a temple of money. Not the money that is earned and spent, but the money that accumulates and multiplies and eventually becomes a legacy passed down from generation to generation. Liam had grown up visiting that temple. His father would bring him on Saturday mornings when he had to review papers in an empty office. He taught him to read bank statements, even though Liam was 8 years old and didn't understand half the numbers. He would say, "This is important, son, not the numbers, but understanding that behind every number is a person with dreams and fears and responsibilities." Robert Sterling had worked at that bank for 25 years, measuring people by their character, and had died 10 years ago, believing that the institution to which he had dedicated his career would continue to measure in that way. Liam was there to prove if his father had been wrong. There were differences, of course. The desks were more modern, the screens larger, but the essence was the same. Northern Star Bank still communicated prestige before communicating service. Liam crossed the lobby towards the desk area. He passed an elderly client with a pearl necklace, who glanced at him and moved her purse to her opposite side, with a gesture so subtle that a less observant person wouldn't have noticed it. He passed a young executive in a gray suit who saw him and then looked away with the specific speed of someone who didn't want to be associated with what he had just seen. And that's when Marcus Thorne intercepted him. Marcus came from an office on the second floor, descending the stairs with the firm step of a man who knew every inch of his territory and knew exactly who belonged there and who didn't. He was 52, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, a burgundy tie that probably cost more than the jacket Liam was wearing, and perfectly combed gray hair slicked back. His eyes met Liam's when Liam was still 10 meters from the first desk, and in those eyes Liam saw exactly what he had come to see, an instant evaluation based on appearance, a conclusion reached in 2 seconds, a decision made before any exchange of words. Marcus quickened his pace. He reached Liam before Liam could continue. "Excuse me," Marcus said. His voice wasn't rude yet, but it wasn't friendly either. It was the voice of a manager handling a situation. "Can I help you?" Liam looked at him. "I want to open an account." Marcus looked at Liam's clothes. He looked at the stained jacket. He looked at the unshaven beard. He looked at the disheveled hair, a process that took less than 3 seconds, but which Liam felt as a complete evaluation of his worth as a human being, based solely on how he looked. "An account?" Marcus repeated. "Yes, here, yes." Marcus took a breath that suggested patience being exercised. "Sir, this bank has minimum requirements for account opening. An initial deposit, documentation, verification of—" "I understand," Liam said. "I am willing to meet the requirements." Marcus looked at him again, this time with less patience. "Do you have official identification?" Liam reached into his jacket pocket. Marcus took an involuntary step back, a gesture that revealed more than he probably wanted to about what he thought Liam might pull out of that pocket. What Liam pulled out was a worn leather wallet. He opened it, showed his identification. Marcus looked at it, without taking it. He read the name Liam Sterling, age 34, an address Marcus didn't recognize as a luxury area. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus said, his tone no longer feigning patience. "I believe there's a misunderstanding. This bank isn't for everyone." Liam waited. He didn't respond, just waited for Marcus to say what he clearly wanted to say, but was looking for a way to say without it sounding like explicit discrimination. "We have standards," Marcus continued. "Service standards that require a certain client profile." "Profile?" Liam asked. Yes. Based on what? Marcus looked at him with an expression that said the question was unnecessary because both knew exactly what it was based on. Based on the ability to maintain minimum balances that justify service costs, Marcus said, with the voice of someone who had rehearsed that phrase before. And how do you know I don't have that ability? Liam asked. Marcus didn't answer with words. His gaze at Liam's clothes was answer enough. It was at that moment that David Miller approached. David was the bank's head of security, 45 years old, in a simpler gray suit than Marcus's, with the posture of a man who had worked 25 years in institutions, where his job was to observe without being noticed, and to act only when necessary. He had been in the lobby when Liam entered. He had been observing the exchange from a distance, and there was something in Liam's face that gave him a sense of familiarity he couldn't quite place yet. Mr. Thorne, David said, his voice professional. Perhaps we could assist the gentleman in David. Marcus interrupted him without looking at him. This doesn't require your intervention. You don't think about this, Marcus said, this time looking at him, in a tone that unambiguously established hierarchy with just enough volume for Liam to hear, but not so loud that clients at the desks would hear. You handle security, I handle clients. Understood? David held Marcus's gaze for a brief second. He had worked 25 years at that bank. He had started as a door guard when he was 20. He had risen to head of security 8 years ago, the same year Marcus had arrived as general manager. In those 25 years, he had seen many managers. He had seen Robert Sterling treat a client in work overalls with the same respect as a client in a $3,000 suit. He had seen other managers make subtle distinctions based on appearance, but never as explicit as what he was witnessing now. And there was something in the face of the man in the worn jacket that made him feel he had seen him before, not recently, not in the bank, but in some context his memory couldn't yet retrieve. But Marcus was his boss, and David had a family to feed and a mortgage to pay, and he couldn't afford to lose his job defending a stranger who perhaps really didn't have the money to open an account at a bank of that level. He nodded, remaining 3 meters away, but without further intervention. Liam noticed. He noticed the tension in David's posture. He noticed that he hadn't left completely, but remained close, as if waiting for the situation to escalate in a way that would require his professional intervention, and he filed that information away for later. Marcus turned his attention back to Liam. Mr. Sterling, he said, his voice now sharp, I am going to ask you directly to leave. This bank is not appropriate for your needs. My needs? Liam asked. Your financial needs. There are other institutions that can serve you better. Institutions with less demanding requirements. Liam looked around the lobby. The elderly client with the pearl necklace was now openly staring at him with an expression that was half curiosity and half horror at the scene unfolding. Not horror for Liam, but horror at what she was witnessing. The horror of a woman who had been a VIP client of that bank for 40 years and had never seen a general manager expel someone in the middle of the lobby with other clients present. She had seen her husband, before he died 5 years ago, being served at that same bank by Robert Sterling. She remembered Robert as a man who treated everyone with the same respect, who measured people by what they said and did, not by what they looked like. And now she was seeing the manager who had replaced that generation treat someone as if they were trash that needed to be removed before it contaminated the space. The young executive had disappeared, probably to an office where he didn't have to witness this. A young employee at desk 3 watched with visible discomfort, and Marcus Thorne stood before him with the posture of a man who was doing the right thing, who was protecting the standards of a respectable institution, who was fulfilling his duty as general manager. Are you sure? Liam asked, his voice calm, without anger, without indignation. Just a simple question. Completely sure. Liam nodded slowly, like someone processing important information. I understand, he said. Marcus seemed relieved that the conversation would end without further escalation. But Liam didn't move yet. Can I ask you something? He said. Marcus sighed. What? How long have you worked here? 8 years as general manager. Why? Did you know Robert Sterling? Marcus frowned. Who? Robert Sterling worked here for 25 years, investment manager. He died 10 years ago. Marcus searched his memory. No, I joined after that. Why do you ask? He was my father, Liam said. Marcus processed that. For a moment, something akin to discomfort crossed his face, but he recovered quickly. I'm sorry for your loss, he said, his tone sounding rehearsed. But that doesn't change the current situation. No, Liam said. I suppose not. A brief silence. Mr. Sterling, Marcus said, his voice louder now. A voice that projected so that those present in the lobby would hear. A voice of authority that didn't ask, but informed. I am asking you one last time to leave voluntarily. If you don't, I will have to call security to escort you out. David, 3 meters away, looked at Liam, then looked at Marcus, as if calculating whether he should intervene and what would happen if he did. Liam looked at Marcus for 3 more seconds. Then he spoke in a voice that everyone in the lobby could hear. People like me don't belong here. The question hung in the lobby air, simple, direct, in a tone that was not accusatory, but genuinely curious, as if Liam really wanted to confirm what both already knew. Marcus took a second before responding, as if deciding whether to confirm aloud what he had implied throughout the conversation. People like you, he finally said, need different institutions with different standards. Standards based on appearance? Standards based on a financial reality that you determined by looking at me for 10 seconds? I have enough experience to make accurate evaluations. Liam nodded, not in agreement, but something more like confirmation of a hypothesis. He turned around, began to walk towards the door. Marcus watched him leave with visible satisfaction. He had handled the situation professionally, without excessive shouting, though with necessary firmness, without physical violence, though with absolute clarity. He had maintained the standards of the bank he had managed for 8 years, with a reputation for efficiency and results. He had protected the image of an institution that couldn't afford to be associated with clientele that would lower the perceived level by other VIP clients. Clientele who paid high commissions precisely because they expected an exclusive environment, free of elements that didn't fit the image of prosperity the bank sold. He had done exactly what a general manager should do. He turned to David, who was still 3 meters away, observing with an expression Marcus couldn't interpret. This is how standards are maintained, Marcus said, in the tone of someone giving a pedagogical lesson. A bank like this isn't for everyone, and part of my job is to ensure that's clear. David didn't respond, just nodded minimally. Marcus went up the stairs back to his office, satisfied, efficient, fulfilling his duty, or so he believed. Liam reached the glass door with a golden sign that said, Bank, in elegant letters. He pushed it. He stepped out onto the street into the midday sun. He walked 2 blocks to where he had parked his car. Not the car he normally drove, which was a late-model luxury electric vehicle with a leather interior and a control screen that cost more than the average annual salary of a bank employee. He had come in a 2010 Honda Civic he had bought cash 3 days earlier, specifically for this. He got in, closed the door, sat for a moment, took his phone from an inside jacket pocket. It wasn't an old phone, it was an iPhone 15 Pro, because there were limits to how far he was willing to go with the disguise. He looked at the time, 11:52 a.m., 18 minutes since he had entered the bank. 18 minutes to be evaluated, judged, and expelled, based solely on how he looked. It wasn't the first time he had done this kind of experiment. 3 months earlier, he had entered a 5-star restaurant in downtown Toronto in similar attire. They had seated him at a corner table next to the washrooms, the one they reserved for clients who technically had a reservation, but whom the maître d' preferred to keep out of sight of other diners. He had ordered the most expensive dish on the menu. He had eaten in silence while waiters treated him with the minimum required politeness, but without the attentive service offered to neighboring tables with well-dressed clients. He had left a $500 cash tip and a business card, identifying him as a culinary critic for an international publication. The restaurant had lost a Michelin star 2 months later when his review was published, describing the experience of a client who didn't fit the establishment's aesthetic expectations. He hadn't done it for revenge. He had done it because he needed to know if institutions that proclaimed excellence based it on genuine service or on the appearance of serving the right people. Now he had just gotten a similar answer from the bank his father had loved. Then he looked at his calendar. Tomorrow, Thursday, 10 a.m., Northern Star Bank Board of Directors meeting, 2 p.m. Vote on SVG Holdings offer. If they voted yes, as everything indicated they would, because the offer was generous and the bank needed capital, SVG Holdings would go from 40% to 65% ownership. And Liam Sterling, sole owner of SVG Holdings, though no one on the board of directors knew it yet, would become the majority shareholder of the bank that had just expelled him for looking poor. Liam smiled, not with joy, but with something more like the satisfaction of a scientist who had just completed an experiment and gotten exactly the result he expected, even though he had hoped to be wrong. He wrote a message to his assistant. Confirm attendance at tomorrow's meeting, 10 a.m. sharp. Let them know I will be arriving as the new majority shareholder of SVG Holdings. He added a second message. Request lobby camera footage from the bank between 11:30 a.m. and 12 p.m. today. Tell them it's for review by the new owner. A third message. Investigate Marcus Thorne, General Manager's complete history. I want to know everything. He sent the 3 messages, put his phone away, looked towards the bank 2 blocks back, an 8-story stone-faced building he had seen thousands of times as a child visiting his father. The building where his father had worked 25 years, measuring people by character rather than appearance. The building that was now 40% his, thanks to a purchase he had made 6 months earlier through a holding company no one knew was his, and that tomorrow would be 65% his, if the board of directors approved the sale of additional shares to SVG Holdings, as everything indicated they would. The bank where they had just expelled him for looking like a beggar. The bank whose general manager had just measured his worth as a person, based on a worn jacket and an unshaven beard. The bank where tomorrow, when Marcus Thorne discovered who the man he had expelled really was, it would be too late for anything but consequences. Liam started the car, and as he drove back to his apartment, in an area Marcus Thorne would never recognize as a billionaire's address, because it was in an unassuming residential tower, but with security that cost more than the bank's annual security budget, he thought of something his father had told him 20 years ago in this very bank. A bank measures people by appearance, son, but the people who matter measure by character. Tomorrow, Northern Star Bank would discover the difference between the 2 ways of measuring, and it would discover that it had measured wrong. Liam Sterling hadn't always been a billionaire. He had been many things before that. He had been the son of an upper-middle-class bank manager who lived comfortably, but not ostentatiously. He had been an engineering student in systems with a partial scholarship, working 20 hours a week in technical support to pay the other half. He had been a junior programmer at a software company that paid enough for a small apartment and food, but not enough for significant savings. And for 6 devastating months 10 years ago, he had been a son sitting by a hospital bed, watching his father die of pancreatic cancer, which doctors had detected too late to do anything more than administer morphine and wait. Robert Sterling had died on a Tuesday at 4 a.m. in a private hospital room that his bank insurance had almost completely covered. A small but clean room on the 3rd floor, with a window overlooking a parking lot and letting in the gray dawn light no one wants to see. Liam had been there for the last 72 hours, sleeping in a recliner chair the nurses had brought him, eating what he could from the hospital cafeteria, watching his father deteriorate from a man who had been strong all his life to a fragile body connected to machines that made regular beeps, marking the time remaining. They had talked a lot in those 72 hours about Robert's life, about his childhood in a small town where he had grown up without money, about how he had arrived in the city at 18 with a few $100s in his pocket and a dream of becoming someone, about his first job at the bank as a messenger, about his slow but steady ascent over 25 years to investment manager, about how at every step he had remembered how it felt to be a person who entered a bank afraid of being judged. His last coherent words, spoken 36 hours before losing final consciousness, had been for Liam. Not about love, though love was implicit. Not about pride, though pride was also there, but about a lesson he had learned and wanted to pass on to his son before it was too late. Don't let money make you forget what it feels like to have none. Liam, 24 years old at the time, had nodded without fully understanding what his father meant. Robert had money, not much by banking executive standards, but enough for a comfortable life, his own house, a new car every 5 years, annual vacations, private university for his only son. "Dad," Liam had said, "you have money." "Now I do," Robert had replied in a weak but clear voice. "But I grew up without it, and I never forgot what it feels like to enter a place where they measure you in 2 seconds and decide you're not worth their time." A pause for breath. "That's why I work in a bank the way I do, because I want every person who enters to know that their worth isn't in their account, but in their character." He had closed his eyes, then opened them again with effort. "Promise me something, anything. If someday you have real money, the kind of money that changes how people see you, don't forget what it feels like to be on the other side." Liam had promised. And 36 hours later, his father had died, and Liam was left with a modest inheritance of $100,000 in savings, plus the house which sold for an additional $200,000, and with a promise he had made without knowing that 10 years later he would have more money than his father had earned in his entire life. That night, after leaving the bank, Liam arrived at his apartment in a 22-story residential tower in an area that didn't look luxurious from the outside, but had 3 levels of security and residence that included 2 professional soccer players, a soap opera actress, and 3 entrepreneurs whose companies were publicly traded. His apartment was the penthouse on the top floor. He had paid $3 million for it 2 years ago. It had a 360-degree view of the city, a kitchen he never used because he ate out or ordered delivery, and an office where he spent most of his time when he wasn't at his company's offices. He took off his worn brown jacket, left it on the coat rack by the entrance. Beside that jacket hung 5 designer suits that cost between $2,000 and $5,000 each. The contrast was deliberate. He liked to have it visible as a reminder that clothes didn't define the person, even if the world insisted they did. He went to his office, opened his laptop. He had 3 emails from his assistant. First, meeting confirmed for tomorrow 10 a.m. Board chairman confirms your attendance as SVG Holdings representative. Second, security camera footage requested. Bank security department asks for reason for request. I told them it's for review by the new owner. They confirm they will have the file ready for tomorrow. Third, investigation into Marcus Thorne, attached in separate document. Liam opened the attached document. Marcus Thorne, 52 years old, general manager of Northern Star Bank for 8 years. Before that, regional manager at another bank for 6 years, branch supervisor for 4 years before that. Education, bachelor's in business administration from a lesser-known private university, master's in finance from an evening program. Clean record, no scandals, no lawsuits, no formal complaints registered. Numbers from his management. The bank had grown 20% in assets during his 8 years. He had reduced operational costs by 15%. He had increased profit margins by 12%. On paper, Marcus Thorne was an exemplary manager. There was an additional section that Liam's assistant had added with a note. Additional information from internal sources. Liam read. Employees described Marcus as professional, but distant. Several mentioned he was obsessive about the bank's image and had implemented a stricter dress code for employees and unwritten client standards that everyone understood. The bank preferred clients who looked prosperous. There was an anecdote about a customer service employee who had been reprimanded by Marcus 6 months ago for serving a client who smelled of paint fumes. Marcus had told her, "You could have directed him to a quick service window instead of bringing him to a desk where other clients see him." The employee had protested, saying the client had a legitimate savings account and needed help with an investment. Marcus had responded, "There are ways to help without other clients having to smell paint while they wait." The employee had filed a complaint with Human Resources. HR had archived the complaint without action because the general manager has discretion over service standards. There was another about a security guard who had been fired for not asking unhoused individuals to move from the front of the bank where they had sat on the entrance steps. Marcus had said, "Clients shouldn't see that when they enter. It's your job to ensure the bank's image is maintained." The guard had argued that the person wasn't doing anything illegal, just resting. "Marcus, I don't care if it's legal. I care what our clients see." The guard was fired 2 weeks later for poor performance, even though his performance evaluation had been satisfactory for 3 consecutive years. There was a third anecdote, this one more recent. Marcus had rejected a small business owner's credit application because his business does not reflect the client profile the bank is looking for. The business was an auto repair shop. The finances were in order, the income was stable, but Marcus had said in an internal meeting, "I don't want our loan portfolio filled with auto repair shops and dry cleaners. I want businesses that sound good when we mention them in reports. Nothing illegal, nothing that violated banking regulations. Just a consistent pattern of a man who measured people's worth by how they looked and who built an institution that reflected that philosophy." Liam closed the document. He thought of his father, of Robert Sterling, who had worked at that same bank for 25 years with an opposite philosophy, who had served clients in work overalls with the same respect as clients in suits, who had taught Liam that people are valued for their character and not for their appearance. And he thought that if Robert were alive and saw what the bank had become under Marcus Thorne's management, he would have felt betrayed. Liam's phone rang, an unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Sterling," a seasoned, calm voice with an accent said. "Yes. Excuse me for calling at this hour. My name is David Miller. I work in security at Northern Star Bank." Liam sat up straighter in his chair. "I remember you. You were there today." "Yes." A brief pause. "I tried to help. I'm sorry. My boss." "Well, you saw what happened. How did you get my number?" "I asked a contact in the systems department to search for Liam Sterling in the database. They found your number registered as a contact for SVG Holdings, the company that is buying shares in the bank." Liam said nothing. He waited. "I knew your father," David said, his voice carrying the weight of old memories. of things that mattered then and still matter now, even if the world had moved on. Robert Sterling. I worked with him for 17 years before he died, from 1997 to 2014. He was a good man. A brief pause where David seemed to be deciding how much to share. He helped me when my daughter was sick and I needed a loan for treatment, he continued. She was 8 years old, leukemia. Insurance covered part, but not all. I needed $50,000. I earned a security guard's salary. No bank would lend me that amount. Liam listened without interrupting. Your father called me to his office. He asked me how much I needed. I told him. He said, we're going to process this as a personal loan with the bank's guarantee. Preferential rate, 10 years to pay. He processed it in 2 days. When it normally took 2 weeks, my daughter received treatment. She's alive today. She's 18. She's studying medicine. I didn't know that, Liam said, feeling the weight in his chest of stories about his father he had never known, because Robert was not a man who talked about his good deeds. There's a lot you don't know about good people, David said. You only notice it when they're gone. The bank changed after your father died. Not immediately, but little by little, the new managers who came had different priorities. Pause. I recognized you today when I saw you at the bank. Not immediately, but when you mentioned your father's name. There's a photo in old archives. Robert, with his son, at a bank event about 20 years ago. You were a teenager in the photo, but the face is the same. Why are you calling? Liam asked. Because I need you to know something. What happened today with Marcus Thorne is not the first time, not the only time. It's how he operates. It's his philosophy. David took a deep breath. And I need you to know that not everyone at the bank thinks that way. Some of us remember how it was before, when Robert worked here, when the bank measured people differently. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow there's a board meeting. And because if SVG Holdings becomes the majority shareholder, there will be changes. And I want you to know that there are people in the bank who want those changes to happen, who want to go back to being what we were. Liam thought for a moment before answering. How many people think like you in security? 3 out of 5. In customer service, maybe half. In middle management, fewer. Marcus hired most of the middle managers. They are loyal to him. And you, why aren't you loyal to him? I am loyal to the bank, not to the man who manages it. Pause. And I am loyal to the memory of men like your father who built this bank with principles that were worth something. Liam felt something in his chest he hadn't felt in a long time. It was gratitude, mixed with validation. Gratitude that someone remembered his father in a way that mattered. Validation that today's experiment had not just been to prove a point, but had revealed something that needed to be changed. Thank you for calling, Liam said. What's going to happen tomorrow? David asked. Tomorrow, SVG Holdings becomes the majority shareholder if the board approves the sale, which they will because the offer is good. And after that? After that, there will be changes. What kind of changes? Liam thought about how to respond, how much to tell a man he had just met, but who had worked with his father, and who clearly had loyalty to something bigger than his salary. Changes that would make my father proud, he finally said. Silence on the other end. Then, that's all I needed to hear. They hung up. Liam remained seated in his office, with a view of the illuminated city below. Office buildings with lit windows where people worked late. Streets with cars moving in predictable patterns. The ordinary life of a city that didn't know that tomorrow something would change for some people, although for most everything would remain the same. He thought about today's experiment, about the 18 minutes in the bank, about Marcus Thorne's face when he evaluated him and decided he wasn't worth his time, about Marcus's voice when he said, "People like you need different institutions." He thought about the elderly client with the pearl necklace who had looked horrified, about David who had tried to intervene, about the young employee at the desk who had seen everything with visible discomfort, and he thought that tomorrow all those people would discover who the man Marcus had expelled really was. Some would feel validated, others would feel uncomfortable. Marcus would feel terrified. Because when you have real power, the kind of power that comes from owning an institution and not just being an employee of it, the words you said, when you thought you were speaking to a powerless person, become evidence of who you really are. And Marcus Thorne had revealed exactly who he was. Liam opened a desk drawer, took out a folder he had kept there for 6 months. Inside, documents for the purchase of 40% of Northern Star Bank through SVG Holdings. He had bought those shares, not for investment, but for memory, because he had discovered that the bank where his father had worked for 25 years was in financial trouble, because he had wanted to save it, even though no one knew it was he who was saving it, and because he had wanted, on some level, that he hadn't admitted even to himself until today, to prove if the bank was still operating with the principles his father had valued. Today he had gotten an answer. No, the bank had changed. It had become a place where appearance mattered more than character, where efficiency was measured in profit margins and not in lives touched, where a general manager expelled people for not looking prosperous enough. Tomorrow that would change, not immediately, not with a speech or a new policy, but it would change because Liam would have the power to change it, and because honoring his father's memory required more than buying shares. It required ensuring that the bank returned to what it had been, a place where people were measured by character. Liam put the folder away, closed his laptop, went to his bedroom, lay down on his king-size bed with Egyptian cotton sheets that had cost hundreds of dollars and seemed ridiculously expensive every time he thought about it, but which his assistant had insisted on buying, because that's how people in his position live. He looked at the ceiling with city light, entering through floor-to-ceiling windows that had no curtains, because he lived on the 22nd floor and no one could see in. He thought about the worn brown jacket hanging on the coat rack next to designer suits. He thought about the promise he had made to his father 10 years ago in a hospital room with the gray dawn light no one wants to see, about Robert's weak hand in his, about a voice he could barely hear, but which had the weight of a last will. Don't let money make you forget what it feels like to have none. He hadn't forgotten it. He had built a fintech company precisely because he remembered, because he wanted to democratize access to investments that traditional banks reserved for clients with high balances, because he had seen his father help people like David and knew that the banking system should do that systematically, not just when there was a kind-hearted manager who bent the rules. He had done experiments like today's precisely because he remembered, because he needed to prove if institutions proclaimed values they truly held, or if they only used them in marketing materials. And tomorrow, the world would discover that the beggar they had expelled remembered perfectly what it felt like to be on the other side. That he remembered every second of those 18 minutes in the polished granite lobby, being evaluated and judged and dismissed, and that now he had the power to do something about it, not revenge. His father wouldn't have wanted revenge, but justice and change, and a bank that returned to what it had been when Robert Sterling worked there. That he would have wanted. David Miller didn't sleep well that night. He lay awake in the small bed of his two-bedroom apartment in a working-class area, 40 minutes by public transit from the bank, staring at cracks in the ceiling he had been promising to fix for 2 years, thinking about the conversation he had had with Liam Sterling and what it meant for tomorrow. His wife, Susan, slept beside him with the regular breathing of someone who had worked a double nursing shift and had the blessing of sleeping deeply despite everything. His daughter, Emily, was in the room down the hall, probably still awake studying for an anatomy exam, because she studied medicine, with the dedication of someone who knew that life was a gift she had almost not received. David had called Liam Sterling without consulting anyone, without Marcus's permission, without HR's approval. It had been an impulsive decision based on recognizing a face in the lobby and a feeling that something important was about to happen, and that he had a small window of opportunity to be part of it. At 2 a.m., he wasn't sure if he had done the right thing, or if he had just jeopardized the job he needed to keep his house, pay for his daughter's university, and ensure his wife didn't have to work 3 shifts instead of 2. But there was something in Liam's voice, when he had said changes that would make my father proud, that had given him hope he hadn't felt in years. Hope that the bank could return to what it had been. He got out of bed at 5 a.m. Susan woke up. "What's wrong?" she murmured. "Nothing. Go back to sleep. You're worried. I know you." David sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at his wife, who had been with him for 26 years, who had supported him when he was a door guard earning minimum wage, who had cried with him when Emily was diagnosed, who had celebrated when Robert Sterling's loan allowed them to pay for treatment. "Today there's a board meeting at the bank," he said. "They're going to approve the sale of shares to a new company, SVG Holdings. The owner is Robert Sterling's son." Susan woke up more. "The manager who helped us with Emily?" "Yes. And is that good or bad?" "I don't know yet, but I think it's going to change things." Susan looked at him with eyes that had seen enough of life to know when change was necessary, even if it was uncomfortable. "What did you do?" she asked. "I called him last night. I told him about the bank, about how Marcus operates." "Why?" "Because someone had to." Susan nodded. Not necessarily with approval, but with recognition that her husband was a man who did what he thought was right, even when it wasn't convenient. "You could lose your job for that." "Maybe. And you called anyway." "Yes." Susan sat up, took David's hand. "Then it's done, and whatever happens today happens. But you did the right thing." David squeezed her hand. "I hope so. At 8 a.m., David arrived at the bank after a 42-minute journey on 2 different buses. He entered through the employee entrance at the back of the building, a gray metal door that only opened with an access card and led to a narrow hallway smelling of industrial cleaner and fluorescent light that flickered every 3 seconds. He swiped his access card. The reader emitted a green beep. The door unlocked with a metallic click. He went up the service stairs instead of the employee elevator because the stairs were faster at this hour, and because he needed to move, he needed to do something with the nervous energy he'd had since 2 a.m. He reached the security office on the 2nd floor, a small, windowless room with 6 monitors mounted on the wall, showing views from cameras throughout the building. A metal desk with an old computer, a creaky chair, a coffee maker that brewed coffee that tasted like dirty water, but served its purpose of keeping him awake. Robert, the night shift guard, was finishing a report on the computer, a 50-year-old man in a uniform that was a little tight, and with the visible fatigue of someone who had spent 8 hours watching monitors where nothing ever happened. "Quiet night," he said. "Just cleaning," and a systems technician who came at 6 to prepare the boardroom for today's meeting. "The boardroom is ready?" "Yes. Projector, chairs, water, everything ready for 10. David nodded. He looked at the monitor showing the empty boardroom on the 3rd floor. A long, dark wooden table, 12 chairs, windows overlooking the street. In that room, in 2 hours, the board of directors would vote on the sale of shares to SVG Holdings, and Liam Sterling would enter as the new majority owner of the bank that had expelled him the day before. David thought about whether he should warn Marcus. If he should tell him that the man he expelled yesterday was Robert Sterling's son and the new main shareholder. If he should give him an opportunity to prepare, or at least not be completely surprised. He decided against it. Marcus had made the decision to expel Liam based on appearance. He had made that decision with confidence and authority. Now he would face the consequences of that decision in the same way, without warning, without preparation, with the complete surprise of discovering he had misjudged. It seemed fair. At 9:30, board members began to arrive. David saw them on the monitors, 7 in total. 3 men in their late 60s in conservative suits, 2 women in their late 50s in business dresses, 2 younger men in their late 40s, looking like executives who had risen quickly. Marcus arrived at 9:40. Dark gray suit, blue tie, a leather briefcase that probably contained a prepared presentation on the bank's performance. David saw him on the monitor across the lobby towards the stairs. He saw Marcus greet employees with nods, but without stopping. He saw him climb the stairs with the step of a man going to an important but routine meeting. Marcus knew nothing. At 9:55, David received a call from reception. "There's a gentleman here who says he's here for the board meeting. His name is Liam Sterling. He represents SVG Holdings." David felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment. The man he had expelled yesterday was returning. Robert Sterling's son was entering the bank his father had loved, and everything was about to change in ways David could sense, but not fully predict. "Let him in. I'll come down to meet him." "Are you sure?" "He's not on the formal guest list. Protocol says I need confirmation from—" "I'm sure. He's the representative for SVG Holdings, the company that's buying shares today. The board of directors is expecting him. I'll be down in a minute." There was a pause on the other end. Then, understood. David hung up the phone, stood up, smoothed his uniform, though there wasn't a wrinkle to smooth. It was the nervous gesture of a man who was about to do something that could change his life or professionally end it, and who still didn't know which of the two would happen. He left the office, went down the service stairs with steps that echoed on the concrete. He reached the door that separated the employee area from the main lobby, pushed it, and entered the lobby. Liam Sterling was there, but it wasn't the Liam of yesterday with the worn jacket and unshaven beard. It was a different man, though the same person. A dark, impeccable suit that probably cost what David earned in a month. A white shirt, a gray tie, combed hair, professionally trimmed beard, an Italian leather briefcase. He looked exactly like what he was, a 34-year-old billionaire who had built a technology company from scratch and was now a bank owner. His eyes met David's. Liam nodded. David returned the nod. They didn't speak. There was no need. The silent recognition was enough. David guided him towards the stairs. They went up to the 3rd floor. They reached the boardroom. The door was closed. David knocked. "Come in," a voice from inside said. David opened the door. The boardroom had 7 board members already seated. Marcus was standing next to the projector preparing a presentation. Everyone looked towards the door when it opened. "Excuse the interruption," David said. "The representative from SVG Holdings is here." The board chairman, a 68-year-old man named Arthur Kensington, smiled. Excellent. Just in time. Liam entered. The room watched him enter with the polite attention given to an important guest. Marcus saw him with the casual gaze of someone seeing another executive at a routine meeting. And then Marcus recognized him. David saw the exact moment it happened. He saw Marcus's face change from professional courtesy to confusion, from confusion to recognition, from recognition to incredulity, from incredulity to silent horror, because the man who entered the boardroom in a $3,000 suit was exactly the same person Marcus had expelled the day before in a worn jacket. The same face, the same eyes, the same posture, only the clothes had changed. Marcus opened his mouth, no sound came out. Arthur Kensington stood up, extended his hand to Liam. Mr. Sterling, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. We've spoken by phone and email, but it's different face to face. Liam shook his hand. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Kensington. Please sit down. We were about to begin. Liam sat in an empty chair on the opposite side of the table, directly in front of Marcus, who was still standing next to the projector with the expression of a man who had just seen a ghost. Arthur looked at Marcus. Marcus, are you all right? Marcus blinked. He regained his composure with visible effort. Yes, excuse me, I was just reviewing the presentation. Can you present later? First, let's hear from Mr. Sterling. Marcus sat down. David saw his hands tremble slightly when he placed his briefcase on the table. Arthur addressed the room. As everyone knows, we are here to vote on SVG Holdings' offer to acquire an additional 25% of the bank's shares. This would take them from the current 40% to 65%, making them the majority shareholders. Nods around the table. Mr. Sterling is here as a representative of SVG Holdings to answer questions before the vote. Arthur turned to Liam. Would you like to tell us something about your vision for the bank? Liam leaned back in his chair, looked around the table. His eyes briefly paused on Marcus before continuing. Thank you for having me, he said. His voice was calm, professional. SVG Holdings is not just a company name. It's my initials. Liam Sterling Graham. My mother's maiden name was Graham. I use her initials for the company. A brief pause for the information to be processed. Some of you may remember Robert Sterling. He worked at this bank for 25 years as investment manager. He died 10 years ago. Arthur nodded. I remember him. A good man. Hard-working. Honest. He was my father, Liam said. Silence in the room. Several board members who had worked with Robert exchanged glances. I bought 40% of this bank 6 months ago because I wanted to honor his memory. I wanted to ensure that the institution to which he dedicated his career continued to exist, and I eventually wanted to have a voice in how it operates. He looked directly at Marcus. Yesterday I came to the bank to conduct a test. I came dressed in a way that did not reflect my real financial position. I wanted to see how the bank treats people who don't look prosperous. Marcus paled. I was expelled from the lobby. Liam continued, his voice not accusing, but not hiding facts either. By the general manager. I was told that people like me needed different institutions, with different standards, based on a financial reality that was determined by looking at me for 10 seconds. Arthur looked at Marcus. Is this true? Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I didn't know who he was, he finally said. His voice sounded weak compared to the authority he had had the day before. Exactly, Liam said. You didn't know, and that is precisely why you cannot continue to be general manager of this bank. Complete silence in the room. My father, Liam continued, measured people by their character, not by their appearance, not by how they dressed or how much money they seemed to have, but by who they were as people, by how they treated others, by their integrity. He looked around the table. I want this bank to operate again with those principles, and to do that, I need today's vote to be approved. I need to have majority control because the changes I want to make are not popular with current management. Arthur processed that for a moment. What kind of changes? He asked. A change of general manager is first. David Miller, head of security, will assume the position on an interim basis while we search for a permanent replacement. Arthur frowned. Why David? Because yesterday, when the general manager was expelling me, David tried to intervene. He tried to defend me, even though he didn't know who I was. That is character, and the bank needs leadership with character. Marcus stood up. This cannot be how these decisions are made. I have 8 years at this bank. I have an exemplary record. The numbers are excellent. True, Liam interrupted. The bank has grown under your management. No one disputes that. But numbers are not all that matters. The way those numbers are achieved matters. And you achieve them by turning the bank into a place where people are measured by appearance instead of character. That's not fair, Marcus said. No. Liam opened his briefcase, took out a document. I have here an investigation report on your management. 3 documented cases of employees disciplined or fired for serving clients who didn't fit the bank's image. 2 cases of loan rejections to small businesses with solid finances because they weren't the type of business you wanted in the portfolio, and yesterday's case where you expelled a potential client based solely on how they looked. He placed the document on the table. You built an efficient bank, but you built it without a soul. And that ends today. Marcus stood for a moment longer, then sat down, defeated. Arthur looked at the other board members. Questions for Mr. Sterling? One of the women raised her hand. What about current employees? Will there be mass layoffs? No, Liam said. The bank operates well, operationally. The problem is not with employees, but with the management philosophy. That will change. But employees who treat clients with respect have nothing to fear. Another member. Additional investment beyond the share purchase? Yes. The plan is to inject capital to expand services to segments the bank currently ignores. Small businesses, middle-class clients, people who have been excluded from traditional banking. Arthur nodded, looked around the table once more. Ready to vote? Everyone nodded. In favor of approving the sale of an additional 25% of shares to SVG Holdings? 7 hands were raised. Vote approved unanimously. Arthur looked at Liam. Congratulations, Mr. Sterling. You are now the majority shareholder of Northern Star Bank. Liam nodded. Thank you. He looked at Marcus. Mr. Thorne, you are dismissed, effective immediately. Human Resources will process your severance according to your contract. You have until the end of the day to collect your belongings. Marcus didn't respond. He had no words. What could he say? That he didn't know the beggar was a billionaire? That he had acted in good faith protecting the bank's image? That his numbers were good, and that should count more than a lapse in judgment about a client? But all that sounded hollow now, because the point wasn't that he didn't know who Liam was. The point was that his decision to expel had been based on appearance. And if Liam had walked in yesterday in a $3,000 suit, Marcus would have treated him differently. And everyone in the room knew that. He simply stood up, took his briefcase with hands that now trembled visibly. He looked once more around the table at the board of directors who had supported him for 8 years, at Arthur, who had defended him in performance evaluations, at colleagues who had celebrated his quarterly results. No one looked back at him, and he left the room without looking at anyone, without a goodbye, without a last word. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded louder in the room's silence. Arthur broke the silence that followed. He took a deep breath, like someone who had just witnessed something unexpected and needed a moment to process. This was unexpected, he finally said. I know, Liam said, but necessary. He turned towards the door where David was still standing. David, please come in. David entered with the caution of a man unsure of what had just happened. David Miller, Liam said to the board. 25 years at this bank. He knew my father. He tried to defend me yesterday, even if it meant contradicting his boss. He is exactly the kind of person who should lead this bank. He looked at David. Would you accept the position of interim general manager while we search for a permanent one, or permanent if you prove you want to stay? David looked at Liam, then at the board, then back at Liam. Yes, I accept. Liam smiled. Not a big smile, just a small one that was more relief than celebration. Then let's get to work. The news spread through the bank in less than 2 hours. There was no official announcement, no mass email from Human Resources, no emergency meeting called. But by 12 p.m., every employee of Northern Star Bank, from floor managers to tellers, from credit analysts to the cleaning staff working the day shift, knew 3 fundamental things that had changed the reality of their workplace in the space of one morning. Marcus Thorne had been fired. David Miller was the new interim general manager, and the bank had a new majority owner, who turned out to be Robert Sterling's son. The speed of propagation was remarkable even for an institution where rumors normally traveled fast. But this was no ordinary news. It was an institutional earthquake, and earthquakes generate waves that move in all directions at the same time. The way the news traveled was organic and predictable. Marcus's assistant saw him leave the board meeting with a pale face and briefcase in hand at 11:05 a.m. She saw him enter his office. She saw him leave 15 minutes later with a cardboard box containing a family photo, 2 books, and a personalized coffee mug. She saw him leave the building without saying goodbye to anyone. The assistant told the human resources manager. The HR manager told the director of operations. The director of operations told the head of accounting. And so on, until the information reached a customer service employee on the first floor, who told a security guard, who told a receptionist, who mentioned it to a waiting client. By midday, the entire bank buzzed with speculation. Michelle Davies, a 32-year-old customer service employee who had been reprimanded by Marcus 6 months ago for serving a client smelling of paint fumes, heard the news with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief, because Marcus had been a constant source of stress. Apprehension, because a change of general manager meant uncertainty, and uncertainty in a bank meant possible layoffs. She went to her colleague Ashley's desk. "Did you hear?" she asked in a low voice. "About Marcus?" "Yes, it's true. They say he left with a box." Ashley looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "And David? General manager? Interim for now, but general manager? David?" Ashley processed that. "The security guy?" "Yes. How does someone go from security to general manager?" Michelle shrugged. "I don't know, but there's more. They say the new bank owner is Robert Sterling's son." Ashley frowned. "The manager who died about 10 years ago?" "That's the one." "And why was Marcus fired?" "No one knows for sure, but there's a rumor it had to do with how he treated someone yesterday." The two looked towards the lobby where the day before Marcus had expelled the man in the worn jacket. They had both seen the scene from their desks. They had both felt uncomfortable, but neither had said anything, because saying something meant contradicting the general manager, and that wasn't smart if you wanted to keep your job. "The beggar?" Ashley asked. "He wasn't a beggar," Michelle said. "That's what they say. He was the new owner. He came in disguise to test how we treat people." Ashley paled. "My God!" "Yes." A brief silence as the two processed the implications. "Do you think there will be more changes?" Ashley asked. "I don't know, but David is different from Marcus, more human." "That's not hard." The two laughed briefly before returning to work. On the second floor, in the office that had been Marcus's and was now David's, Liam and David were sitting, reviewing the bank's organizational chart. The desk still had Marcus's belongings he had left behind. A Mont Blanc pen in a marble pen holder, a desk clock with the bank's engraved logo, celebrating 8 years of excellence. A framed photo of the management team at last year's corporate retreat. David looked at these objects with the expression of a man who still didn't quite believe he was sitting in that chair. "Can you have all that removed?" Liam said. "Bring your own things. This is your office now." "I don't have office things," David said. "My desk in security had a computer, a phone, and a picture of my family. That's all." "Then bring your family photo. That's a good start." David nodded. He looked at the organizational chart on the computer screen. "There are 12 middle managers," he said. 8 were hired by Marcus. The other 4 were here before him. Which ones were here before? David pointed to names. Sarah Jenkins in commercial loans, Michael Chen in investments, Emily White in human resources, and Andrew Stone in operations. "Do you know Sarah and Michael?" "Yes. They worked with your father. They're good. Emily is professional. Andrew is complicated. Very loyal to numbers, no matter how they are achieved." Liam made a mental note. "And the 8 hired by Marcus?" "They vary. Some are competent, but they share Marcus's philosophy on the type of clients the bank should have. Others just followed orders without questioning. We need a meeting with all of them today, if possible." David looked at his watch. "It's 12:30. How about 3 p.m.? "Perfect." David paused before asking, "What am I going to tell them?" Liam looked at him. "The truth, that the bank is going to change, that we are going back to the principles my father valued, that those who want to be part of that are welcome, and those who don't can look for employment elsewhere. Some will probably resign, but I prefer a smaller bank with the right people to a big bank with people who are only there for the salary." David nodded. He understood the logic, though he was concerned about implementation. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "Why me? For general manager, there are people with more experience, with education I don't have, with a more appropriate appearance." "Appearance?" Liam interrupted. David fell silent. "Yesterday," Liam continued, "when Marcus was expelling me, you tried to intervene. You knew that contradicting your boss was risky, but you tried anyway. That is character. It wasn't enough. I didn't really defend you. You tried within the limits of what you could do without losing a job. You need to support your family. That's not cowardice. It's reality. And the fact that you called last night to apologize and to offer me information about how the bank operates shows that your conscience wouldn't let you rest. Liam leaned back in his chair. My father measured people by their character. You have character, and you have loyalty to something bigger than your salary. Those two things are more important than an MBA or managerial experience. Liam paused. He looked around the office that had been Marcus's, an office that was now David's, though David still hadn't moved anything to make it his own. Do you know what the hardest part of leading is? Liam asked. David shook his head. It's not making difficult decisions. Those are hard, but they have logic. You can analyze, you can consult, you can come to a conclusion based on data. Liam leaned forward. The hardest part is having conversations where you have to tell people who have worked with you for years that the way they've been doing things is wrong, and doing it without destroying their dignity in the process. David listened. You're going to have those conversations, Liam continued, with the managers Marcus hired, with employees who have operated in a certain way because that's what they were taught, and some will resist, some will resign, some will make things difficult just on principle. So why me? David asked. If it's so difficult, why not bring in a professional manager who has already done this? Because a professional manager doesn't know this bank, didn't know my father, doesn't have an emotional connection to what we are trying to build. Liam held David's gaze. You do. And that connection will matter when things get tough, because you will remember why you are doing it. I don't know if I can do this, David admitted. I don't know if you can either, but I'm willing to find out. Are you? David thought of his father, who had died working in a factory at 62, of his mother, who had cleaned houses to pay for his high school education, of his daughter, who was studying medicine thanks to a loan Robert Sterling had processed in 2 days. He thought that his entire life he had been an employee, following orders, and that now he had an opportunity to be something different, something more. Yes, he said, I am willing. Then let's start with the 3 p.m. meeting. At 3 o'clock sharp, 12 middle managers were seated in a small conference room on the second floor, a room normally used for team meetings and performance reviews. It had a rectangular table that seated 14, a whiteboard on the wall, a window overlooking the street. David entered first, then Liam. The 12 managers looked at David with expressions that varied between confusion and curiosity. Everyone knew he had been promoted. No one understood why. David stood in front of the whiteboard. Liam sat in a corner of the room, not at the head of the table, but in a side chair, a position that communicated he was there, but that this was David's meeting. Thank you for coming, David began, his voice sounding less confident than he would have liked. I know today has been unexpected. Some nodded, others just waited. Marcus Thorne is no longer general manager. I am taking over the position on an interim basis. I don't know yet if it will be permanent. That will depend on how we handle the coming months. Sarah Jenkins, commercial loans manager, raised her hand. Why was Marcus fired? David looked at Liam. Liam nodded. Because his management philosophy did not align with the values the bank needs to have, David said. He measured clients by appearance instead of ability, and that is not acceptable. Andrew Stone, operations manager, frowned. Marcus's numbers were excellent. The bank grew 20% under his management. Numbers are important, David said, but they are not the only important thing. The way we treat people matters. The way we serve the community matters. This sounds like idealism, Andrew said. Banks don't survive on idealism. They survive on profit margins. Liam spoke from the corner. Banks survive when they have loyal clients, and clients are loyal when they are treated with dignity. Not just the rich clients, all clients. Andrew turned to Liam. And you are? Liam Sterling, majority shareholder. Uncomfortable silence. The one who came yesterday as a beggar? Andrew asked. He wasn't a beggar, Liam said. It was a test to see how the bank treats people without the appearance of money. And we failed the test, Sarah said. Not as a question, but as a statement. Marcus failed the test, Liam corrected. Some of you might have acted differently. I don't know. But I know that the bank needs to change direction. Emily White, human resources manager, spoke. What kind of changes? Customer service policies that treat everyone with respect, Liam said. Lending criteria based on real financial capacity, instead of a type of business that sounds good. Training for employees on how to serve without judging. That will reduce margins, Andrew said. Perhaps in the short term, Liam admitted, but in the long term it builds a reputation worth more than quarterly margins. Andrew didn't seem convinced. With all due respect, you sound like someone who has never operated a bank. You're right, Liam said. I haven't operated a bank, but I have operated a fintech company worth $800 million. And I did it with a philosophy of serving people that traditional banks ignored, and it turned out to be quite profitable. That shut Andrew up. Michael Chen, investment manager, spoke. I knew your father. Robert Sterling was a good man. If you want the bank to operate as he operated, you have my support. Mine too, Sarah said. Emily nodded. Human resources will support the changes. Of the 8 managers hired by Marcus, 3 said they would support the new changes, not with visible enthusiasm, but with nods that seemed genuine. 2 remained silent, looking at the table with expressions that could be processing information or calculating how long to stay before looking for employment elsewhere. 3, including Andrew, had expressions that communicated skepticism without words, furrowed brows, crossed arms, the posture of someone who wasn't convinced and wasn't going to pretend to be just out of politeness. David made a mental note of who was in which category. The supporters, Ben Carter from personal loans, Chloe Bell from marketing, and Ryan Davies from internal audit. The quiet ones, Daniel Lee from technology and Olivia Green from customer service. The skeptics, Andrew Stone from operations, Thomas Evans from corporate loans, and James Taylor from treasury. 3 supporters, 2 neutrals, 3 resistances, of 12 total managers, counting the 4 who were there before Marcus. The numbers could work if the 4 from Robert's era held firm, and if the 3 new supporters were genuine. That gave 7 out of 12, not an overwhelming majority, but enough to implement changes without resistance blocking everything. I understand this is an adjustment, David said, and that not everyone will be comfortable with the new direction. If anyone feels they cannot work with this philosophy, there's no resentment. You can seek positions in other institutions and will receive neutral references. It was a diplomatic way of saying, you can resign if you want. Andrew stood up. I think I'll do just that. Excuse me. He left the room. The other 11 managers looked at each other. No one else stood up. Anyone else? David asked. Silence. Good. Then let's get to work. Individual meetings with each of you during the next week to discuss specific departments. For now, continue normal operations with just one change. If you see an employee or manager treating a client in a way you would consider disrespectful, report it directly to me. The meeting ended. Managers left. David and Liam remained in the room. We lost 1, David said. We'll lose more, Liam said. But the ones who stay will be the right ones. David looked out the window at the street below. He saw Andrew leaving the building with a phone to his ear, probably calling a recruiter. Do you think this will work? He asked. I don't know, Liam admitted, but I know it's worth trying. The 2 fell silent for a moment. My father used to say something, Liam said, that institutions don't have a soul by themselves, they only have the soul that people give them. Marcus gave it a soul of efficiency without heart. We're going to give it something different. What? A soul of a place where people are seen for who they are, not for how they look. David nodded. Your father would have been proud. Liam didn't respond with words, just a small smile that was more nostalgia than joy. That night, at 7 p.m., David called Susan from the office that still didn't feel like his. How did it go? She asked. Different. Intense. I don't know if I can do this, but you'll try. Yes. Then you've already done the hard part. The rest is just work. David smiled. When did you become so wise? I was always wise. You just pay attention now. They hung up. David turned off the computer, took the photo of his family he had brought from the security office. He placed it on the new desk. Susan, Emily, and him at the beach 2 years ago, all smiling. An ordinary day for an ordinary family. Now that ordinary family had something extraordinary, and David was going to do everything he could to live up to it. He left the office, turned off the light, closed the door, and as he went down the stairs towards the employee exit, he thought of Robert Sterling, who had worked at that same bank for 25 years and had never known that his son would return to buy it, and that his legacy would live on in ways neither he nor his son could have predicted. The bank was changing, not immediately, not with a dramatic announcement or a new policy that would solve everything in a day, not without resistance from people who had operated in a certain way for years and who would see change as a threat instead of an improvement, but it was changing. The simple fact that Marcus was no longer there was change. The fact that David, a security man who had started as a door guard 25 years ago, now sat in the general manager's office, was change. The fact that Robert Sterling's son was the majority owner and that his first action had been to fire the manager who measured people by appearance was change, And that change would be felt in the way employees treated clients, in the policies that would be implemented, in the conversations that would be had, in the decisions that would be made. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be real. And for the first time in years, David felt that he was working in a place where his values and the institution's values were aligned. That's what he thought as he stepped out into the cool city night, which continued its rhythm without knowing what had happened in the 8-story stone-faced building. It was a rare gift in an employee's life, and he wasn't going to waste it. 6 months later, Northern Star Bank was a different place from what it had been, not in an obvious way that a casual client would notice upon entering. The polished granite was still the same. The chandeliers still projected warm light. The velvet ropes still separated the VIP area from the general area, but there were changes that people who paid attention could see. There was a new plaque in the lobby next to the main entrance, bronze with engraved letters that read, "In memory of Robert Sterling, 1962 to 2014, investment manager who measured people by their character." There was a new policy in the employee manual. Section 3, paragraph 2. All clients will be served with the same level of respect and professionalism, regardless of their apparent appearance, attire, or account balance. There was a new team in middle management. 3 of the 5 managers Marcus had hired had resigned in the first 6 weeks after the change. They had been replaced by people David had recommended, people who had worked with Robert, people who understood the difference between efficiency and humanity. And there was a new client who entered every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Her name was Maria Rodriguez. She was 62 years old. She worked as a house cleaner in luxury residential areas, where she earned a modest salary cleaning spaces she could never afford to live in. But she didn't care. She had a goal. She had a 19-year-old daughter named Sophia, who was studying her first year of university in a nursing program, the first person in Maria's family to go to university. And Maria worked 6 days a week, 12 hours some days, to ensure Sophia could continue studying without having to work full-time, as Maria had had to do at her age. She saved with a discipline that impressed even bank employees who saw clients of all types. Every dollar counted, every saving was a step towards a better future for Sophia. And every Tuesday, religiously, she deposited part of that salary into a savings account that David had personally opened for her 3 months ago, when she had timidly entered asking if the bank accepted small accounts. Today was Tuesday. Maria entered the bank at 11:03 a.m. She wore her work uniform that smelled faintly of cleaning products and had a small stain on the sleeve that hadn't come out completely in the wash. 6 months ago, Marcus Thorne would have directed her to a quick service window or asked a guard to suggest she return at another time, or would have found a way to make her understand that people like her were tolerated, but not welcome. Today, a young employee at desk 3 stood up when she saw her enter. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said with a genuine smile. "How are you?" "Fine, dear. Thanks for asking." "The usual deposit?" "Yes. And I wanted to ask about the investment you mentioned last week." "Of course. Please have a seat. I'll explain." Maria sat in the chair in front of the desk. The young employee, whose name was Ashley, and who had been personally trained by David in the bank's new philosophy, opened a folder with investment options designed specifically for modest income clients who saved with discipline. She explained for 15 minutes. Maria listened with attention that came from years of doing work that required following precise instructions. She asked intelligent questions. Ashley responded with respect that was not a performance, but genuine. In the end, Maria decided to invest $500 in a low-risk fund that Ashley had recommended. "It will grow slowly," Ashley said, "but it's safe, and in 10 years, with consistent deposits, you'll have something significant." "That's what I want," Maria said. "Something for my daughter so she can study, so she doesn't have to clean houses like me." Ashley processed the investment, printed a receipt, and handed it to Maria. "Thank you, dear." "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. See you next Tuesday." Maria left the bank with the receipt in her purse, and with a feeling she hadn't felt in other banks where she had tried to open accounts before, a feeling that she mattered, that her money, though modest, was valuable, that she as a person had dignity that the institution recognized. David saw the exchange from his second-floor office, which was now his. It was no longer a small, windowless room with security monitors. It was an office with a window overlooking the street, with a wooden desk, with a chair that didn't creak, with a plaque on the door that read David Miller, General Manager. It still seemed unreal to him. 6 months as General Manager. The first 3 months had been interim, while the board of directors searched for a permanent replacement. But in month 3, Arthur Kensington had called him to a private meeting. The board voted. Arthur had said, "They want you to stay permanently." David had processed that for a moment. Why? Because the numbers are good, because employees respect you, because clients are satisfied, and because you do the work in a way Robert Sterling would be proud of. So David had stayed, with a salary increase that allowed him to buy a small house in a better area so Susan wouldn't have to work double shifts, with better health insurance for his family, with a pension that guaranteed a dignified retirement, but more important than that, with a job that had meaning. His phone rang. It was Ashley from Desk 3. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Rodriguez just left. Everything good. She opened an investment as we discussed. Perfect. Thanks for updating me." He hung up. He smiled. Maria Rodriguez was not a relative, though they shared a surname, but David felt a connection to her anyway, because she reminded him of what this bank had been for his family when Emily was sick, and she reminded him why the work he did now mattered. Someone knocked on the office door. "Come in." Liam Sterling entered. He came unannounced, as he did every 2 or 3 weeks. Sometimes in a suit, sometimes in casual clothes. Today he wore jeans and a button-down shirt, the appearance of a tech entrepreneur who didn't need to impress anyone. "David, do you have a moment?" "Of course. Sit down." Liam sat in the chair in front of the desk. He looked around the office, that had been Marcus's, that was now David's, that had David's family photo on the desk, and a diploma from a bank management course David had completed online over 6 months. "How are things going?" Liam asked. "Good. Quarterly results are above projection. Customer satisfaction is up 22% according to the survey, and employee turnover is almost zero. Problems? Nothing serious. Some old clients complained that the bank is lowering standards by serving more segments, but they are a minority." Liam nodded. "How did you handle the complaints?" "I explained the new philosophy. Some understood, others decided to go to other banks. I let them go." "Good." A brief silence. Liam looked out the window towards the street below, where people walked with midday haste. "There's something I want to show you," he finally said. He took a folder from the bag he was carrying, placed it on the desk. David opened it. Inside, architectural plans, designed for new bank branches. "What is this?" David asked. "Expansion. 3 new branches in middle and working class areas. Places where traditional banks don't go because capital density doesn't justify costs according to traditional models." David studied the plans. They were different from conventional branch designs, more open, less intimidating, with comfortable waiting areas and accessible desks instead of velvet ropes and glass partitions. When construction starts in 3 months. And the board approves. And they will approve because the numbers work if we measure success differently. Differently, like not just by immediate profit, but by client lifetime value. Maria Rodriguez today deposits small amounts, but in 10 years, if we serve her well, she will have significant savings, and she will recommend the bank to her daughter and her friends. And the network grows. David nodded. It was exactly the kind of thinking Robert Sterling would have had. Long-term over short-term, relationships over transactions. "I like it," he said. "I need you to oversee the project, to ensure that the new branches operate with the same philosophy that we changed here." "Why?" Liam looked at him. "Because you understand what we are building. Not just a bank, but an institution that treats people with dignity, and I need that in the DNA of every branch from the start." David felt the weight of responsibility, but also pride. "I will do it." Liam stood up. He was about to leave, but stopped at the door. "David." "Yes? Thank you." "For what?" "For calling me that night 6 months ago, for not staying silent, for having the character to defend a stranger, even if it could cost you your job." David didn't know what to say. He simply nodded. Liam left. David remained in his office with the plans for the new branches on his desk, and with the feeling that he was being part of something bigger than just a bank. He was being part of a change in how a financial institution could operate. With profit, yes, but with soul too. That afternoon, at 5:30 p.m., David left the bank through the main entrance instead of the employee entrance. He no longer had to hide in the service area. He was general manager. He could use any door he wanted. He passed the bronze plaque with Robert Sterling's name. He stopped, read it as he did every day when leaving. In memory of Robert Sterling, investment manager, who measured people by their character. He thought that Robert had never known David as general manager, that he had died 10 years before David had a position of power in the bank, but that somehow, through his son, Robert continued to influence how the bank operated. He continued walking. Outside, the city continued its ordinary rhythm of a Tuesday afternoon. Cars in traffic, people walking from work to home or from home to a second job or to wherever life took them. David got into his car, which was no longer a 15-year-old model, but a 3-year-old model he had been able to buy with his general manager's salary. He started the car, drove home, which was no longer 42 minutes away, but 20. As he drove, he thought of Marcus Thorne, not because he missed him, not because he felt guilty about his role in the firing, but because it seemed important to remember that Marcus had not been a monster. He had been a man who measured success in the wrong way, who confused efficiency with excellence, who thought that numbers were all that mattered, and who had paid the price for that. He didn't know what had happened to him after being fired. He hadn't actively tracked him. He hadn't asked contacts. But he had heard rumors in banking circles that he had gotten a position in another bank, in another city, that he had learned his lesson, or that he hadn't learned it, that he was the same, or that he had changed. David didn't know which version was true, and honestly, he didn't care. What mattered was that the bank no longer operated with Marcus's philosophy, that people like Maria Rodriguez could enter without being judged by how they looked, that employees like Ashley could serve clients with dignity without being reprimanded, that the institution Robert Sterling had loved was returning to what it had been. Not perfect, never perfect, but better, significantly better, and that was enough. 3 weeks later, the elderly client with the pearl necklace who had witnessed Liam's expulsion 6 months earlier entered the bank. She had not returned since that day. She had transferred her accounts to another bank, out of shame, for having witnessed such horrible treatment without doing anything to stop it. But she had heard rumors that the bank had changed, that the manager who expelled the beggar had been fired, that the beggar was a billionaire and now the bank owner, that everything was different. She wanted to see for herself. She entered the lobby with the caution of someone unsure of what she would find. She looked around. Everything looked the same. Polished granite, chandeliers, velvet robes. But then she saw the plaque, read it, and then saw Maria Rodriguez leaving a meeting with Ashley with a smile on her face and a receipt in hand. And then she saw David crossing the lobby with a young employee, patiently explaining something, treating the employee with respect that she remembered seeing in Robert Sterling 20 years ago. She approached a desk with steps that showed the indecision of someone who was still unsure if she was doing the right thing. The employee, the same Ashley who served Maria, recognized her immediately. She had been one of the bank's oldest VIP clients before leaving. "Mrs. Thompson," Ashley said, standing from her chair. "It's good to see you. How have you been?" Mrs. Thompson looked at Ashley, then looked around the lobby, seeking evidence of the change the rumors promised. "Fine, thank you." A brief pause. "I heard the bank has changed. That the manager who..." That day, she didn't finish the sentence, but both knew what she was referring to. The day 6 months ago, the expelled beggar, the scene Mrs. Thompson couldn't forget. "Yes," Ashley said, with understanding in her voice. "It has changed a lot. It has changed for the better. Would you like me to explain?" "Yes, I would." She sat down. The employee explained the new philosophy, the new branches, the focus on serving all segments. David's leadership, who had worked with Robert Sterling. Mrs. Thompson listened, and in the end, she said something she hadn't planned to say. "I want to transfer my accounts back." "Really?" "Yes. This bank is now what I thought it was 20 years ago when Robert Sterling served me, and I want to be part of that." The employee smiled. "We will process the transfer. And welcome back." That night, Liam Sterling was in his penthouse overlooking the city when he received a report from David. "Mrs. Thompson returned, transferring accounts back, and 3 more clients who had left also contacted asking about returning." Liam read the message. He smiled. It wasn't about money, though money mattered. It was about validation that the change he had initiated with the worn jacket experiment 6 months ago had resulted in something real, in an institution that operated differently, in a bank his father would have recognized. He went to the coat rack by the door. The brown jacket with stains he had worn that day still hung there, next to designer suits, a deliberate contrast he kept as a reminder. He touched it, the worn fabric, the stains he had added with coffee and dirt, a disguise that had been a testing tool. He thought of the promise he had made to his father 10 years ago, in a hospital room with the gray dawn light no one wants to see. In Robert's weak hand in his, in a voice he could barely hear, but which had the strength of a last will. "Don't let money make you forget what it feels like to have none." It had been a strange promise at the time. Liam was 24, and had $100,000 in inheritance. He wasn't rich. He didn't have real money. So why did his father give that warning? But Robert had seen something in his son that his son hadn't yet seen in himself. He had seen capacity. He had seen ambition. He had seen that Liam was going to build something great, and he had wanted to ensure that when that happened, Liam wouldn't forget where he came from. He hadn't forgotten. 10 years, $800 million. A penthouse with a city view. Clothes that cost more than Robert earned in a month. But the promise remained intact, and he had built something that ensured the bank wouldn't forget it either. A bank where people were measured by character, where Maria Rodriguez could invest $500 and be treated with the same respect as a client with $500,000. Where David Miller, a security guard who dared to defend a stranger, was now general manager, building a different future. Where a beggar in a worn jacket had shown that appearance didn't reveal worth, and that judging by appearance was a mistake that cost everything. Liam released the jacket, leaving it hanging, because although he no longer needed it to prove a point he had already proven, he kept it as a reminder that the most important test was not the one he did in the bank 6 months ago, but the one he did every day since. The test of maintaining humanity when you have the power to lose it. The test of remembering that billions of dollars don't change a fundamental fact, that all people have dignity, that appearance doesn't reveal worth, that judging by how someone looks is a mistake that costs not only business opportunities, but something more important, the humanity of the judge. Marcus Thorne had lost that humanity. He hadn't been born without it. He had lost it gradually in small decisions that accumulated, in assumptions he never questioned, in a philosophy that confused efficiency with excellence, and he had paid the price. Liam didn't want to pay that same price, so he kept the worn jacket hanging next to designer suits, and every time he saw it, he remembered 18 minutes in the polished granite lobby, being evaluated and judged and dismissed, based solely on how he looked. And he remembered that he never, ever wanted to be the kind of person who did that to someone else. That was the test that mattered. And so far, with 6 months of evidence and a transformed bank, people like Maria Rodriguez being treated with dignity, he was passing that test. Not perfectly. No one passes tests of humanity perfectly, but well enough. And that was all Robert Sterling had asked for. "Get out of here, you beggar!" That's what they yelled at him in the bank of polished granite and crystal chandeliers for looking poor. And he didn't argue. He didn't shout. He didn't defend himself. He just left. Because he knew something the manager didn't know. That the next day he would own that bank. The worn jacket revealed who had character. And it wasn't the man in the $3,000 suit who expelled someone based on how they looked. It was the one who dared to look poor to test if dignity was real or just a performance for the right clients. Have you ever been judged by your appearance before being known? Tell me below. And if this story reminded you that a person's worth is not in their clothes, but in their character, subscribe. Because here we tell stories of people who proved that appearance never reveals who you have in front of you. See you in the next story.